Hi everybody, and welcome to Matrix Live Season 8, apparently, Episode 2. I'm afraid you'll start with me this week, Matthew, talking about some of the stuff which has been going on in Matrix this week, which I'm excited about. Um, so, where to start? Lots and lots of interesting projects flying around at the moment, and it kind of feels like we're almost at in the lull before a storm, as a lot of these are really long-term major upgrades which have been kind of bubbling along in the background for months, or in some instances years, which are now starting to really come to life and should be landing over the next couple of months, or probably by the end of the year. And the sort of thing I'm talking about here is OpenID Connect, which is going and shifting how the entirety of authentication works in Matrix. Things like Element X, the brand new reimagining of Element built on top of the matrix-rust-sdk, Sync v3, also known as sliding sync, and many others. So I wanted to talk about these in a bit more detail. The one which I think is most top of mind for me right now is this OpenID Connect, OIDC work, where we've seen a huge shift in the last couple of weeks, as I think folks, particularly in the core team and also at Element, have realized that there is just a huge step improvement to be had by going and shifting from Matrix's current authentication, which is very homebrew and custom, in favor of OpenID Connect as a standard way to do authentication. And I think the way that Kenton put it to me a few weeks ago was that his hot take is that Matrix should not be an authentication API, and instead we should use other people's authentication APIs for that. And when you kind of think of it in those terms, it makes a lot more sense. Now, the OIDC work has had a couple of massive breakthroughs in the last week, one of which is getting Element X on iOS to actually use it. And I don't have a video to hand, I'm sure we'll share it soon. But suffice it to say that having a native iOS SwiftUI app hit the login button and then bring up a kind of pop-up which takes you through to the authentication server for your home server to get your username and password or log in via other SSO mechanisms, which then sort of disappears again once you're logged in. Just feels really nice, like much, much better, more native user interface than I could have possibly expected. And in fact, almost makes it feel more glossy and professional and more, I don't know, I was going to say more Google-like, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but rather than it feeling like a really jarring, oh, now we're shifting to something else for auth, it more feels like, and now as you're kind of jumping into your home server at this point, having selected a home server, obviously your home server is the one that authenticates who you are and then hands you back to the main flow of control to the app. And so seeing that firsthand has been really exciting. Another thing, though, that has come off it is trying to figure out how OpenID Connect could work with single action logging in. So particularly whether it's possible to log in using an existing device. And it's something that we always intended and wanted in Matrix when we added the cross-device verification for end-to-end encryption. Wouldn't it be nice if you could do what you can do on Discord or WhatsApp and basically log into a new account just by, say, scanning a QR code on your existing account, or using your existing account to scan a QR code on your new login. And obviously we don't have that today, and it's a shame because the centralized alternatives do. And there was a concern that OIDC might take us further away from that, because superficially you might think that having to jump through a authentication portal provided by your home server is a step away from going and being able to log on using an existing device. But as of this week, we've designed out flows of how this could work using something called the OIDC device flow, which actually already exists to allow you to do this. Now, it hasn't been built yet, but from what I can see of the designs, it's looking super, super promising that OIDC itself has this concept to basically display a QR code on the device that you're logging into and then scan that with your existing device and bang, you're in. So we will effectively get this, or at least the building blocks for it for free in a standardized manner, which will be a huge step forwards in terms of onboarding. However, what would be even better would be if this logging in also magically transferred over your end-to-end encryption state, so you didn't need to separately then faff around comparing emoji or scanning a QR code or entering a recovery key or whatever to get access to your new account. What if it could do that by default? And for the first time, we've seen the encryption side of the core team working together with the OIDC side of the core team to try to splinch the two of them together. And Faye on the crypto team has been working with Hugh, who's been doing all of the device flow-based stuff, to try to figure out a way in which you might be able to basically establish a secure channel between the two devices before they're actually logged in. And it could be via Matrix as a guest, it could be via turn servers, but you basically establish a secure channel between the two devices, which can then be used to effectively do the out-of-band verification that you would use for normal short authentication string stuff. So basically, you would start off by scanning a QR code, which is then used to establish this channel that in turn is used for both the OIDC flow and the end-to-end encryption verification flow, which would happen transparently over this channel without even showing any user interface to the user. So you literally scan the QR code and bang, you're in, both on OIDC and for crypto. Now this is the holy grail, and honestly I'd basically ruled it out as something that we would be able to do anytime soon, but seeing a plausible design for it that is also compatible with OIDC could be completely transformational. So watch this space as we try to figure out how to use QR codes to log in on the OIDC world, probably using Element X as a test bed for that. Talking of Element X, folks have been out on summer holidays, but it's looking increasingly exciting. The big next step there is to integrate Sync v3 on it, but there was a major breakthrough from the Rust SDK guys today, or yesterday actually, as they published Node.js bindings for Rust SDK. So this isn't specifically an Element X thing, but it's exposing the underlying crypto crate of the matrix-rust SDK so that it can be used from JavaScript, both in a Node environment, and Travis has already updated matrix-bot SDK to use the new bindings so that we can do native Rust-based end-to-end encrypted bots and bridges at last. Only about 3 years in the making, but we got there at last with the release this morning. And also can be used as the basis for adding in Rust-based encryption using the dosmats, the new end-to-end encryption implementation in Element Web too, by going and using the bindings through to WASM inside Element Web, and therefore move Element Web towards a shared code base at last with Rust SDK and Element X when we get there. So really exciting to see this project called Element R on Element Web happening and having the sort of hardest bit of it, i.e. the node bindings, sorted out first. On the node bindings themselves have been a bit of a nightmare to do. There are multiple different binding architectures for calling Rust from Node. There is NAPI, the native API, and there is Neon, a newer one. We chose to go with NAPI as the more mature one, but it turns out that NAPI's attempt to match V8's garbage collection with Rust's memory lifecycle stuff is not great, and you can end up in situations where JavaScript's garbage collector has deleted the Rust object from under you that Rust still thinks exists, at which point you're going to have a seg fault. So we lost a couple of weeks chasing down some nasty seg faults until we broke out Valgrind and figured out what was going on. And so the thing we've released today is based on NAPI, but I wouldn't be surprised if in future we move over to Neon, which apparently gets that lifecycle approach right. So that's what's been happening on Rust SDK. Sync v3 or sliding sync is also being added to Rust SDK with the hope that we can get it into Element X rapidly. At the same time, we've also been doing a load of work this week on integrating it with Element Web. So Element Web, you probably noticed, turned on the universal search, also known as Spotlight search, by default, I think, at the beginning of the week, which means that all the sliding sync code on the sliding sync branch has had to be updated in order to pull in your search results from the sliding sync server, because the client no longer knows about all of the rooms and users that it would in a pre-sliding sync mode. Because if you're not familiar, the whole point of sliding sync is to only grab the information to the client that the client needs to operate. So rather than today on Sync v2, where we go and download every room you've ever been in when you log in and you sync, you have to update every room that you're possibly in. Instead, in sliding sync, you literally just do the ones which the sliding window of your room list is currently looking at right now. So lots of work basically to polish this up, and it's looking increasingly promising. And I'm hoping that between the twin attacks of getting Element Web talking sliding sync and getting Element X on iOS at least, and Rust SDK talking sliding sync, we're inching a lot closer to having this something that people can play with by default. What else is going on? Thirdroom has been making a lot of progress too. I think Thirdroom is unusual in that it's going so fast and there's so much stuff landing that almost they haven't had time to yell about the progress on it. And I don't want to kind of wreck anybody's thunder, because I assume we're going to have a pretty big bang launch in the next couple of weeks, or probably mid-August, probably a month from now. But suffice it to say that Hydrogen as the platform that Thirdroom builds on, or Hydrogen SDK, has now been used to provide the whole room list, so you can switch between rooms, and you can switch between worlds, which are the virtual worlds built on Matrix that Thirdroom exposes. Lots of fun about memory management and making sure that as you switch between the worlds, everything gets rapidly disposed of and then rapidly reinitialized as you jump back in, and that we don't have any memory leaks as you switch between worlds. It has avatars now, albeit not animated ones, but that's what Nate is working on frantically at the moment. We've got spatial audio in there. We've got customizable world data via GLTF that you can upload when you define your world. And if you're feeling particularly adventurous, do head over to thirdroom.io. Point it perhaps at the thirdroom.dev server, which is the development server that has things like much larger file size limits on it, so that you can put 100 megabyte, 200 megabyte GLTF world descriptions in there, because the world assets are often pretty big, and have a play, because it is getting closer and closer. The text overlay to bring up the actual matrix room chat over the world is also working really, really nicely with Hydrogen SDK too. Other stuff that needs to happen before Thirdroom launches, other than animation and animated avatars, is what was I going to say? It's about 30 degrees C in this room, by the way, which is why I'm failing to concentrate. Animated avatars and editing is the obvious thing. That we already have the framework for a editor, which is basically a heads-up display that you get by hitting the tilde key when you're in the world, which would allow you to basically flip into an editing mode where you can make minor changes to the GLTF, and you can pull in other GLTF assets and nest them together, and then hit save, at which point it updates the underlying GLTF blob that describes the state of the world, which is just stored in the matrix room as a file transfer. And then, hey presto, you've done the whole inception thing and changed the geometry that you're working on. So it's been really fun to see Robert going and porting over some of the editor stuff from hubs, the spoke editor, experimenting with a fork of it, which can be applied to work in this kind of direct manipulation manner. Other stuff, peer-to-peer, lots of work happening over in peer-to-peer land, with Devon going and adding in work to the peer-to-peer simulator so that we can track bandwidth usage. There's a bit of a crossroads going on there at the moment because there are two different architectures for peer-to-peer matrix. One called hard state, where you explicitly negotiate the links between the peers on the network in order to decide who can route via where. And the other is called soft state, where you assume that the network is constantly breaking from under you, and so you constantly poll the network, putting traffic out to basically figure out what routes exist. And the advantage of hard state is there isn't anything like as much network traffic, but you have to trust that if you ask somebody to provide a link, that link continues to stay there. And as a result, it's easier to attack, in that malicious people can claim that they are providing a link and then they drop the traffic. So to game against that, you have to do peer scoring to figure out the reputation of the other nodes on the network and whether you can trust them to route your traffic, etc. And doing that in a Byzantine fault-tolerant manner is quite hard because people could easily conspire against you to go and basically break the network because you're trusting them too much. And now that's historically how we've been trying to make Pinecone work, and it's looking viable, but it's still quite a lot of attacks on it. The alternative is soft state routing, where you basically keep figuring out where the network is and you don't trust anybody at all, but it means that you have quite a lot of background traffic flying around as you keep probing the network. And as the network grows, that background traffic basically grows linearly to some extent. And so you end up capping out tens of thousands of nodes or something, rather than all the nodes on the net. So lots of work going on in peer-to-peer land, trying to figure out how we reconcile between the hard state and the soft state routing models, and whether there's some hybrid that we can find that can work, or whether there's a tiered approach that uses home servers as a more trusted backbone in order to improve the scalability of soft state routing, or whether we should just go for it and put out hard state and then play whack-a-mole with any attacks which emerge. Fun times there. And then two final things. I've been working a lot on trying to improve Element itself as the app of today, not Element X or Element R, but just plain old Element Web, iOS and Android that we know and love. And looking at what we're calling chronic problems, issues that have been there for years now, which a lot of the community and a lot of us have almost become desensitized to. Now, some of them are things like performance, which obviously Sliding Sync and Element X act to improve. Others are crypto related, which should be improved by moving over to matrix-rust-sdk crypto. But other ones are things like fast joins on remote rooms, or fast joins on local rooms, or many, many, many other sort of things which should just work, but in practice are either slow or flaky today. I've gone and built a big list of the top 80 or so of these and trying to prioritize them. And over the next couple of months, really trying to shift the focus of the core Element team away from building new features and instead polishing existing ones. We've had a go at this several times in the past and made progress in some places and sometimes not in others. I'm hopeful that this time will be different, not least because some of the longer term ones are already in hand by the bigger projects, but it's the ones which kind of fit in the gaps or fall between the gaps sometimes, which we need to address, that we're going to try to fix. And then finally, MSCs. It's been a bumper week for matrix spec improvements, and some really long-term important MSCs got to final call for proposal to be merged. And specifically around aggregations, the way in which matrix we have events which refer to other events, like reactions and edits and relations and threads and all this sort of thing. And so MSC 2676, message editing, finally hit FCP. This basically documents the behavior that we have today rather than trying to fix defects in it, because practically speaking, the behavior we have today has already shipped, and it's a matter of documenting what went out. It basically predated the MSC process when we did edits a few years ago. And so this is one of the last things which are being grandfathered in under the old regime. Going forwards, obviously, any new features to Matrix follow the Matrix spec change process. Then we also got reference relations in, MSC 3267, which describes how events can reference each other in general for things like threads or replies or whatever. Other stuff is private read receipts, MSC 2285. After only 3 years in purgatory, we finally managed to get to consensus on it and also land the implementations in Synapse and Element Web. So real soon now, you should finally be able to send read receipts without other people being able to see that you have. Then we merged MSC 2832, or at least FTP'd it, which is a home server to application server authorization headers, contributed by Talir a while back, so that we can use bearer tokens via auth headers when talking to ASs. And we also FCP'd 3786, which came from, I think, Shyman, talking about how to add a default push rule to ignore server ACLs, so you don't get push notifications when ACLs get updated on a room. Finally, we also closed or proposed to close 2 MSCs, which is in some ways promising in terms of being more selective of what goes into the spec. We rejected 3244 from Valer, which was room version capabilities, the ability to define capabilities for a given version of a room, because we already have more than enough capability APIs. And then also MSC 2529 from Ben P, which was a proposal to just send captions for images as image events, unrelated to send captions as text messages that relate to an image event but are separate from that event, which got rejected because extensible events provide a much, much better way of combining together the caption and the image in the same event rather than having 2 separate events that need to be correlated together. So it's really fun to see us getting to closure on some of those MSCs. And I'm out of time. Hopefully this was useful, give you an idea of what I'm thinking about this week. And thank you for listening. Thank you for flying Matrix and supporting the project. And I hope you're as excited as I am to see some of the big things in the funnel land in the coming months, as well as hopefully see some progress on some of our chronic defects getting resolved at last. Have a great weekend. Bye.